Welcome, everybody, to this installment of Three Questions With. It's my pleasure to introduce everyone to Dr. Ashish Jha, probably a stranger to no one. He is the Dean of Brown University School of Public Health, and he has burst on the scene as a trusted voice about how to respond to the COVID crisis. He is a practicing physician, and most importantly, to me anyway, is he is a tireless public servant navigating for so many of us about the greatest public health issue of our day. Welcome to Three Questions with Dr. Ashish Jha. So much has changed over the past 2 years. Can you reflect on your role as a public health leader and how it has evolved over this time?
Yeah, Tim, first of all, thank you for having me here. I'm really excited to spend some time with you. And I love the museum, and any opportunity to speak to people who have the same affinity for the Museum of Science that I do is a delight. Boy, what have we learned over the last 2 years, and how's my role changed? You know, I used to spend most of my time doing research and thinking about how to translate it to a broader policy audience. But when the pandemic hit, I realized one of the things, I think many of us did, that we also needed to start translating science and evidence to the broader American people to help them navigate this. And that has been a very different role than I think most of us have played in our lifetimes. But that's something that was absolutely essential during this pandemic. And I think it's been an honor and kind of an opportunity to try to take everything we're learning about this novel virus and how we manage it and how we deal with it, and to help people understand people make sense of it, and to figure out how they're going to incorporate that into their own lives.
That leads really to the next question, and that is that the COVID crisis has forced everyone in the world to act as citizen scientists. Everyone has to decide whether and when to wear a mask. Everyone has to decide whether and when to get vaccinated, and so on. Where do they turn to get reliable information? How concerned are you that they're turning to bad information, to misinformation?
Yeah, this is really the issue of our times in some ways. You know, whenever there is an information vacuum, often bad actors will step in and spread disinformation, or even people who are not bad actors themselves will end up spreading misinformation. We've seen that in every pandemic and every health crisis, that information is really the lifeblood of a good response to a health crisis. Generally, you want to turn to trusted sources like, for instance, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC. CDC should be providing guidance for Americans about when to wear a mask, when to think about testing, what kind of vaccines to get, and when to get vaccinated. That information has not been either as reliable or as timely in this pandemic for a variety of reasons. And I think that unfortunately opened up a window for a lot of other people. I think people have to find other trusted voices. One of my personal trusted voices is Dr. Tony Fauci, who really is one of the leading global experts on infectious disease and immunology, and knows more about this than almost anybody. But obviously it goes beyond that. And you have to look at not just people's credentials, but their track record and what they've studied and how they are engaging. And people have had to sort of figure this out on their own. Who do they want to listen to and not? But I often say, begin with CDC. It's a great place, but find other really trusted scientists, people who have a long track record like Tony Fauci. And that's a great place to start and to get your information.
I'd like to follow up on the misinformation side. I'm sure that through your work on Ebola in the past, and as you've studied things, although you've seen the role of misinformation, was it a surprise to you at the extent of it and really the viciousness of it, or could you have predicted that going in?
No, one of the things I really did not get right was the level of misinformation and disinformation that we would see in this pandemic. I knew that in every health crisis, that's a feature, you got to manage it. But I did not think it would lead, for instance, to between a quarter and a third of Americans deciding to opt out of getting a safe and highly effective vaccine, or making other decisions that are harmful to them and their families. And I think there are a couple of things that are going on. I mean, first and foremost is we live in a very different information ecosystem than we did 100 years ago, or even, with the flu pandemic, or even a decade ago when we faced other health crises. It's one that's far more decentralized, and that you have a lot of people who can spread information very, very quickly. That's powerful as a source of good information, but it can also be a real challenge in terms of spreading of bad information. The other big lesson for me, Tim, is I used to have this mental model of Science can be complex. If you figure it out and explain it to people in a reasonable way, that will change people's behavior. It does for some people. But I think I have increasingly come to believe that that's too naive, and that in fact, if you want to motivate action, yes, you got to give them data and evidence and facts. You also have to talk about things that are meaningful to people, and meaning and what they value really motivates action. That's something we in science often don't think enough about. But there are a lot of people who spread misinformation who get at that much, much more quickly. And we've got to do a better job of engaging the public, not just on the facts, but also on what's important to them, what matters to them, and how science and data can help them achieve their goals more effectively.
Let's push that line of thinking a little bit more and apply it not only to public health, but to other challenges that the community faces, and the role of data, for instance, on climate change, or the role of data on other things. Maybe data is not really the way to begin if we try to find common ground in science. In this time, we have found some common ground. We as a people did come together, but it wasn't enough. So I wonder if you could just think a little bit more about the potential for science to become common ground, and any additional thoughts you've had on how we can make that so.
Yeah, so I do think that science can be a common ground, and data does matter. Obviously, data and evidence does move people, and people do want to know what it means. What we've learned is that it's more than just data and science. And so I think one of the things that scientists can do is partner with trusted voices in communities, partner with people, religious leaders, political leaders, social leaders, who people trust. That partnership is going to be really important if we want to move people and we want to engage people. People do want to know the science, but they also want to know that it's coming from people that have their best kind of intentions at heart, are people that they have with whom they share values. That's how we bring people together. And I think we just have to find ways of doing more of that in the days, weeks, and months ahead.
And then there's peeling back from that, this vision of how industry, academia, public health, government came together to address the COVID crisis. There was this collective impact effort that helped produce the vaccine and distribute the vaccine. And that, as a model for collective impact, must have made everyone encouraged. When you think about the role of collective impact and apply it not to a pandemic, which clearly is bothering everyone, but to something much more sort of subtle and insidious in our society, like mental health or obesity or dementia or opioid abuse, just to mention the few that are there. What are some of your hopes for collective impact across different sectors?
Yeah, I think, Tim, you really nailed it. When I think about how we pulled off building and distributing hundreds, millions, really billions of doses of these vaccines, highly effective, safe vaccines in such short order, it wasn't because of government or private sector or academia alone. They all worked together. We could not have done it without every one of them pulling in the same direction. Now, it made sense that everybody was going to focus on this because this was the biggest crisis that we had faced in a century. But also, I do think it becomes a model. So when you think about mental health is the issue that a lot of us were worried about before the pandemic. I think coming out of the pandemic, I'm now deeply worried about what is happening on mental health. Do we need private sector solutions? Absolutely. Do we need government to be involved in this? Absolutely. It's really important work of academics to do and scientists to do in this area. So if we can pull those groups together to start tackling mental health, to start tackling climate change, I think we can. There's really very little that we cannot accomplish, but we have to get to those roots and realize that we each bring different sets of strengths to the table. And that's why it's so important for all of us to work together.
You have no doubt discovered in yourself a kind of fearlessness that maybe you've always had. But when I hear you in the public and hear what you say, it's so straightforward, it's so fearless, and it's something that will be really required for these four sectors to work together to address something like climate change, a kind of fearlessness. What message, what encouragement do you have for other public leaders who face public backlash, fearful as it might be? What voice do you have for people to discover their own fearlessness?
Well, what I would say, in this pandemic, the lesson I learned was, there were just so many people who were suffering in kind of in immeasurable ways. And the problem and the size of the problem was so immense that we needed clarity of action, clarity of communication. And that meant putting up and pushing back against the bullies and the people who want to sow disinformation. What I have been trying to say to leaders is, if the problem is big and is complicated, you've got to follow the science, you got to follow the evidence wherever it leads you, because that's how we're going to get to solutions. And you got to bring people along. And that doesn't mean you'll be able to bring everyone along all the time. But if we're committed to the cause of getting things right, that's what we have to really be motivated by. And that's what I've tried to do in my own work over the last year and a half. And I think there are a lot of public leaders who feel committed to the cause, who are willing to do the hard work of bringing people along and being fearless about it and pushing back against the naysayers who always want to find a reason why we can't make progress.
Well, speaking for myself, I take a lot of courage from your fearlessness, your compassion, your empathy. I think other public leaders will as well, and we will apply that to the other great issues of our time. But thank you for everything you've done, everything you continue to do, and good luck in everything.
Tim, thank you for having me, and thank you for everything the museum does for our community and really for our country in teaching people the power and value of science. It is how we make progress as humanity, and I'm delighted to be a part of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.